Okay, well, it's a pleasure to have here with us Nazan Üstündağ to talk to us about her very interesting chapter in Building Free Life, a chapter titled The Theology of Democratic Modernity, Labor, Truth, and Freedom, a chapter which is very thick, dense with many interesting interpretations of the political thought of Abdullah Öcalan. So thank you for agreeing to speak with us, Nazan.
Hi, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
All right, cool. So let's just begin with the first question. What for you is the significance of Imrali?
Yeah, I mean, I attribute different meanings to Imrali in the chapter, but most importantly, I attribute the meaning of a threshold. Imrali is an island prison, as you know, and island prisons have been like since, I don't know, since the beginning of modernity, I can say, during the colonial times and also in apartheid regimes, in slavery, islands have always been used as prisons for let's say people who are a threat to the order, a threat to the governing regimes. And in that sense, there have been a lot of studies on what an island prison signifies, right? I mean, I have in mind Michael Tosick's Cocaine Museum, which I really like a lot, and how he discusses like islands at some point in the book, island prisons as a different kind of trajectory for following the history of modernity and for understanding its anatomy, if you want, how it operates and how it kills, how it destroys, how it maims, all these things. So I think Imrali should be regarded in that framework. But what I wanted to emphasize in this work was its nature as a threshold, because I mean, what I attribute, the meaning I attribute to threshold is that thresholds somehow transform space into time. And what the state intends to do, is to create a space outside of society, outside of history, outside of politics, in Imrali, by excluding Öcalan to an island that is inaccessible. But through what Öcalan does there, through writing, by initiating a peace process between 2013 and 2015, each time he can access his lawyers or his family members, which is rare, but still it occurs once in a year or two times in a year. He always transforms that excluded space into a harbinger of hope that has not yet come. I mean, a hope for something that has not yet come. There is a promise, so a different kind of prophetic time, if you want, emerges in Imrali each time Öcalan talks. He gives the meaning to history, to what has happened, and he, in that sense, and also promises a future, and in that sense, like he brings together, he creates a threshold between yesterday and tomorrow. He creates a threshold between the state and people. I mean, because each time again he talks, some secrets of the state are revealed. State is laid bare, if you want, through in his speech, and state loses its magic, its secretive, its mysterious, its mysterious quality, and I think that's also very important. And yeah, I mean, there are many different examples I can give, but all of them point to this transformation of an excluded space into a temporal, into a temporality that promises something, a prophetic temporality, and that both gives meaning to what has happened and also promises a future. And I think that's what mobilizes people constantly. People want to hear Öcalan talk. I mean, I personally always feel when an important event occurs, I wish now we could have access to Imrali and Öcalan would say something, because he has this enormous capacity to tell a story, to produce a truth. So when people feel confused, what's happening? Why did the organization do that? Why did the state do that? And then Öcalan speaks, and when Öcalan speaks, puts this into this kind of temporality, and things make sense again. And that's the power of Imrali, I think, and that's why and how people become mobilized again and again and enter hunger strikes, which is extremely difficult, for a whole year long hunger strikes in order to enforce the state to send lawyers or family members to talk to Öcalan. I don't know. Was that?
Yeah, that's very much very profound set of reflections there, and resonates with I was thinking a lot about Walter Benjamin and the prophetic mode and this sort of stuff. I guess pushing forward on a related theme. So you characterize capitalist modernity as a theology. So what exactly do you mean by that?
You just mentioned Walter Benjamin. So Walter Benjamin actually says capitalism is a religion, right? And Öcalan himself says that nationalism is the religion, is the contemporary religion. So I preferred using the word theology rather than metaphysics for that reason, because I wanted the essay to resonate with what Öcalan and Benjamin say in the sense that they evoke religion, and how religious thought, the structures of religious thought are constitutive of how we think of modernity as well. And modernity has, I describe in that article, modernity has its magic, its sacred institutions. Modernity has its sacred rituals. For example, property, right? Property is a sacred institution that cannot be questioned. And when you even questioning it, it becomes a blasphemy. The same thing with family, especially nuclear family. Eventually we came to even the LGBT movement has come to put family to a sacred position by fighting, or by making the fight for the recognition of gay marriage the priority for gay movement. So somehow this marriage, nuclear family, property, these things become endowed with religious and sacred meanings, and they cannot be touched, they cannot be talked about, and the moment you talk about them, you commit blasphemy. And that's, I think, in a sense, why we should think about of capitalism as a theology or progress. Right now, we are entering a new period where like words like de-development, or what was it? What would I call it? Just against development. The whole movement against development. I forgot anyway. So the whole idea of progress and development are being questioned, but that's very difficult to do that, because progress is somehow embodied in all our institutions, in all our way of thinking. Again, the sovereign borrows a lot from the structure of religion, where we put God to be. So the sovereign nation state, in a sense, is like God. All these things I wanted to evoke with the word theology, and how basically Öcalan goes against them, against these. He talks of a new metaphysics, which I would call again a new theology, because he talks about the members of the movement as apostles and all that. But yeah, I mean, that should, in a sense, question all these unquestionable things, think about destroying the sovereign and making non-sovereign politics. So I thought that was like almost not a political, but a religious struggle. It has an aura, it has this religious aura, because it goes against these sacred things, and it is considered to be committing sacrilege.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. So you also say that in Öcalan's framework, there's no space for melancholia. Could you explain that?
Well, that's also a concept I chose to use because I wanted to address Öcalan's decolonial thought. His thought is against colonization, right? I mean, he's he's trying to, all his writings are about how to build a decolonial society. Now, if you look at the literature on decoloniality and colonialism and post-coloniality, and how this literature was addressed by psychoanalysts, by cultural analysts, they always say that post-colonial culture is a culture of melancholia. Why? Because there is something lost, right? By occupation, by being occupied, by being colonized. These colonized and occupied countries have lost the capacity to build a future. Somehow there's a rupture, and that rupture has made it impossible, that occupation has made it impossible for them to continue their autonomous history. So we don't know what their future could have been. We don't know what newness they would have produced if they weren't colonized. So something is lost, and that lost thing, we cannot name it. We don't know, because I mean, the possibility, the potentiality got lost. So we don't know, and we cannot never replace it. There is, and the whole post-colonial literature, Chakrabarti, Chatterjee, Spivak, think about them, how melancholic their writing is, because they talk about the impossibility of even conceptualizing what we have lost. And yeah, because that trajectory is made impossible. Arundhati Roy's beautiful novel, The God of Small Things. I cannot forget, like, there's an expression there. She says, they occupied our history house. I mean, it's occupation and colonization is not because only about occupation and colonization of land. It's not about dispossession. It's about robbing imagination, right? Occupying imagination, suddenly forcefully introducing new concepts and identities against which the colonized has to define itself and has to think about itself. Well, this is a very melancholic state, but Öcalan doesn't think in those terms, because for him, I think his feminism helps him not to think in those terms, because he traces occupation back to 5,000 years ago, right? I mean, with the emergence of patriarchy and with the oppression of women, with the with the initial act of man robbing women the means of production, the means of reproduction, and the means of defense, hierarchy, occupation, all those things have started. They were always there. So to think about a free future, it's not like, there is nothing to be missed. Even before colonization, because of patriarchy, these societies had their imagination occupied. Women were already robbed their potential to create a future. So why miss that? We don't need to miss that. We have to create something completely new, a non-patriarchal society. And then there is not melancholia, but there is enthusiasm. So if we get rid of patriarchy, not only colonization, not only capitalism, but if we get rid of patriarchy, these 5,000 years long of long durée history, if we get rid of that, what's going to come next? And that's very enthusiastic. I mean, that's really exciting, and enthusiastically people are hoping and fighting for it, and melancholy suddenly disappears. So did that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I think distinguishes the Kurdish movement as, in a way, holding on to a kind of revolutionary hope that is largely extinct from many movements, many spaces in the world. So
yes,
yeah,
it's not a movement that wants to go back, because when they look back within this ideological framework, they don't see happiness and freedom, because women were oppressed anyway.
Yeah. Now, in a footnote, you make the interesting claim that you think it would be better to conceptualize women, Kurdish, or worker as nodes pointing to relations of exploitation, occupation, and violence, rather than as identities. Could you elaborate on that claim?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult, but I can't say, and it's not very well expressed, I must say, because I wasn't very clear of what I was thinking. I know that I'm very much a feminist. I'm very much an anti-colonialist, but I'm not I don't believe in identity politics. I don't see these things, these women or Kurd or Black as identity, but as a paradigmatic position within, women and men. Let me make clear by talking about patriarchy, for example. In patriarchy, women and men are not constructed identities. That are plural, etc. Right? Yes, of course, there are different kinds of men, different kinds of women. There is plurality. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is women and men are paradigmatic positions in an exploitative system, and man as a position constantly appropriates the means of production and defense from women. I mean, whatever kind of man you are, it doesn't matter, and I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in it. Let's say I'm not very much interested in it. I mean, it has, of course, political and social repercussions, but my thinking operates not by seeing the multiplicity of men, but by seeing that whatever kind of man you are, and however society constitutes masculinity, it's always, in a sense, at a given moment, men are appropriating things from women. And the same thing is with white and Black. Black is not an identity. I mean, Black is not an identity that can be compared with white. Black is excluded, the exclusionary node of humanity, right? I mean, it's a paradigmatic position that is constantly excluded from humanity, and all these mechanisms, technologies work so that white people continuously appropriate things from Black. So therefore, I don't want to in a sense, talk about multiple identities, different identities, women, men, Caucasians, Blacks, and I don't know, Armenians. I mean, that's how we talk about, because, you know, in politics normally in Turkey, when we talk about different identities, I want to talk about the positions, the paradigmatic positions in which these people are constantly dispossessed.
Very interesting, yes. And what do you mean when you say that Öcalan's narrative displaces melodrama and rejects skepticism, that he calls for life to be lived on epic terms?
You know, one of the I guess a lot of people have talked about that. Modernity, I mean, about what I'm going to say now. Modernity is also about genres, right? How do we tell our stories? How do we become relevant? How do we matter? It's not only, it's through our stories, how we build our stories. And most stories, I mean, the stories that are encouraged in modernity are melodramatic stories. So I suffered, right? I am suffering as a woman, and somehow I want to become emancipated. And something happens, there's a resolution, and I become emancipated. So there is the suffering and then recognition. That's what, you know, in a, or that's one position, or we are skeptics. We don't believe in emancipation. We don't believe in resolution. But these are the most common narrative genres through which we tell our stories in modernity. And in capitalist modernity. And I believe we cannot create a democratic modernity. We cannot create a democratic autonomous system without changing also the way in which we tell our stories, our genres. And I think Kurds are very much struggling with that, because once you say you don't want a new nation state, you know, you want to democratize, you want to become an energy in the Middle East that transforms all societies. You don't want a different nation state. Well, how can you tell that story? Because normally the story that we knew was, you know, okay, we are oppressed, and then we fought and we have a nation state, and the story ends. But that's not how Kurds want to tell their story. So they need new genres, and they are experimenting with new genres. And one of them is definitely epic genre. You know, like telling stories in very epic ways. And one of them, when I was writing that article, I was more thinking about that how, like in the Kurdish movement, people in their movies, in their cultural productions, they are experimenting. Of course, they have melodramatic cultural productions as well, but they are experimenting with new genres. And one of this is ethical decision making. People's stories do not matter. In a particular moment in time, irrespective of your life story, what kind of a decision you make and how that decision affects the world in which you live. For example, the decision to take arms, the decision to throw a stone, the decision to sign a paper, sign a petition, let's say, and what its repercussions. And that decision cannot be explained by looking back to your life story, to your suffering, but only by looking at that moment, and how at that moment somehow you become the vehicle of an ethical decision. Your body becomes the vehicle of an ethical energy, let's say. And I think like the one movie that they have, that the Rojava Film Commune recently finished, and it has been screened in a few places, and I think it's a great movie. The end will be spectacular. It's called. That movie is told in that genre. And it's a whole new way of telling stories. And I thought, yeah, that's what I meant basically when I was writing that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Very interesting insights into this, as I say, quite profound chapter of yours. Are there any other thoughts that you want to share with us with respect to what went into the chapter?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about. I think a lot of new work needs to be done on these, especially these concepts that Kurdish movements value, like freedom. What does freedom mean? What does love mean? What does loyalty mean? I think they are giving new content and naming the world, renaming the world. And especially the women are doing this. They are renaming the world because the world has been named by patriarchy. The world has been named by man. And now we want to rename the world. And therefore, they think a lot about these concepts, these, everyday language. And I think a lot needs to be done about that. And that's what I also tried to do in that chapter. Yeah, and I want to do more on that. That's what I can say, I think, Jeff. If you have any more questions, just go ahead, shoot. Otherwise, I'm okay.
I think there would be one last question, which kind of sums up a theme that you come up again and again. It emerges in the text, and that has to do with this idea of family, property, and nation state as the building blocks of capitalist modernity. And then you say, conversely, movement, flexibility, and energy are the building blocks of democratic modernity. And I think that's a really pithy way of formulating the alternatives. If you could maybe say a little bit about that formulation.
Yeah, well, I mean, what does property? As I said, a lot more work has to be done on that, and I don't want to say that article is a finished article. It's a beginning, if you want. But what's amazed me, I mean, what I like in Öcalan's writing is how he uses quantum physics. And when he uses quantum physics, he is endowed with another kind of language where he can talk about fluids and energy and movement and motion. And that language itself is, in a sense, freeing. Because when you look at what property, what family, and what nation state does is draws boundaries and puts us in our place, right? It is through these institutions that we know our place in the world, and we cannot change, in a sense, our place in the world without destroying those institutions. We are constantly put in place, in the sense of put in place in how we use it in everyday language, and also put in place geographically. You are known and you are then bordered. And what freedom means is I mean, how we can achieve freedom is through destroying those institutions by movement, by flexibility, and by creating institutions that will take people out of these boundaries. Like, for example, what did the movement do in Rojava? One of the things they did first was building academies. I mean, all revolutionary movements in the world were telling them, okay, what are you going to do with property? What are you going to do with property? You have to get rid of property if this is a real revolution. But the movement said, wait a minute. I mean, we are going to make it invalid. We are not going to destroy it. We are going to make it invalid by taking people out of those areas through which they operate. And academies every day bring tens and hundreds of people out of their home or out of their workplaces, out of their whatever, and bring them to educate them in new terms. And so people continuously circulate in society against the flow that property, family, and nation state, against that traffic. A new traffic is created. And that new traffic is going to somehow destabilize those institutions. And I think that's what the movement, yeah, okay, I think I.
Yeah, very much so, very much. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's as I say, it's a very deep set of reflections. It's worth studying and thinking through, as is the whole book. Building Free Life, I think, is a really powerful book. But I think that
Definitely.
this chapter is a real gem inside of it. So thank you for giving us some insights into it, helping us begin to interpret what is at some points a dense, but definitely a very worthwhile text to work with. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.